Thanks for staying with us on Point. The Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Lechesa Tsenoli, joins me now. Thank you so much for your time on SABC News. Just talk to us first about how you first came to know about the Archbishop and his work.
Well, firstly, good afternoon to your listeners and viewers. As a young activist, as we grew to become involved, we came to hear about something called liberation theology, but also later about people who were Christian, who sought to object to apartheid using the religious belief as a foundation for its practices. And so the South African Council of Churches increasingly became involved, so to speak, over time, to persuade the leadership inside and outside of the church to be active, that Christians must be involved in actively creating conditions in their country that everyone, irrespective of their color, creed, or anything of that sort, were recognized as such and would be treated with dignity, and that it is unfair for the policies of the system to continue to exist. So over time, then we came to hear about individuals such as the Archbishop himself and others who were very active in the church movement, so to speak, to campaign against apartheid. And finally, I think we must attribute to people like him and others who he worked with inside the South African Council of Churches and in the world, to persuade the United Nations to declare apartheid a crime against humanity back then. And this is the work that we came to do. Of course, I later worked for Diaconia, a church agency in Durban, as its communications organizer. I was recruited to do that work. And of course, I increasingly came to know a lot more about bishops and leadership such as them. And he was amongst the most prominent amongst them, including in Durban, Bishop Heli and others, activist bishops, so to speak, that we came to know.
What stands out for you about his work and his messages from the time that you first interacted with him and heard of him until today?
I think because I came into knowing about him in a way that I began to understand is possible, activism from within the church. Because the way some of us came to know about the church, it really had nothing to do with what people were concerned about in a very practical manner. It was more about what happened afterwards, but also a little bit about what may happen now, but in the big construct of things, we didn't know much about what could be happening and could be done. And so the activism that began to grow increasingly was very attractive, because we felt that what we were doing ourselves in our own right, not necessarily inspired by religion, was correct to be joined by others from inside their religious and or other beliefs, that what must be done is crucial. That message, which we call social action, was a very important and prominent thing for me about him, and subsequently his courage, because the apartheid government was brutal. There's no mincing of our words about it. It was brutal, and it acted against anybody who was outspoken and so on. And that courage about him was very inspiring. We felt supported in communities as we were harassed left, right, and center. So that courage that he displayed in both speaking to those in power at the time, but also in talking to people in general, getting them to be persuaded to see the necessity to act and not just think about and talk about and pray about if they are religious. It was that about him that I laughed, because he had the what are these days called emotional fortitude. You know, the ability to overcome the fears and speak outrightly and very clearly to communicate your standpoint was what is very outspoken about him and in my memory of him, so to speak.
Well, he was outspoken on many issues, even related to what he saw as the failures of the ANC government, world issues as well, such as the occupation of Palestinian territories and more. What about the last parts of his life in democracy and speaking out then should we learn and take as lessons going forward?
The courage I speak about went beyond only fighting against those who are wronging us as a people in the past, but also humanity internationally. He was, in a sense, I can say, an internationalist in our own political language, in that he recognized the necessity and the courage to speak out, that we should speak out against wrongdoing. Even today, I mean, like the questions of integrity, conducting ourselves ethically and protecting and defending the vulnerable and the poor and those who were in deep trouble is not only a feature of the philosophy of Africanness, but a global phenomenon about humaneness. He spoke from that angle, and therefore this is why he was heard beyond the boundaries of South Africa and our continent, because his message was about humaneness. That if that is looked down upon, if that is discarded in our practice, then those who suffer are the defenseless ones, and that he couldn't stomach. And this is why we admire his courage for having been outspoken, even about us, specifically, as you say, about government, about the ANC specifically, but about government as well. Government is beyond the ANC, and in a sense, its influence notwithstanding, it is important that the state must operate always with people in mind, that what it does for the interest of the people and not for any other value that anyone might want to accrue from what's happening. So it is absolutely a message that we think brought us and others together across our divide. I do suggest that Archbishop Tutu was cut off from a cloth and, or as we say in other languages, from the equality clay that made people of this generation, whether they were people like him, a bishop from inside a church, a traditional leader, a political leadership, that spoke out and were courageous, but also they were very humane. What they did for the poor and the vulnerable was outstanding examples that we must continue to emulate. We cannot restrict him. We must also see him in that broad context of the people, both within religious community as well as outside of religious community, who, like him, displayed similar courage, similar outspokenness about defending the poor and demanding that what we do inside the state and or in institutions such as the church must be such that people come first, that they are the ones about whom we must worry. Their vulnerability must be our concern that makes us sleepless. Other than that, he was quite, he didn't mince his weight.
Thank you very much for your time, Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Lechesa Tsenoli, joining us there via Zoom.
Thank you very much.